My friend pointed out to me that clearly something happened, and that nothing in these words explains where all these wounds came from. She was right. I haven't come out and explained much yet. I haven't spelled anything out for you in black and white except an offbeat life and mild neglect. Maybe I just can't yet. Some scars are invisible, and that's good, I suppose. Because you go out there and you take your shot, but the world is harsh. Where's the blood, they'll ask. Where's the murder in this story? The daily beatings and the rape. As if that's the only way almost a dozen people get mind-fucked for life. Reader, if you need me to come out and say it all in the next few episodes, or even soon, I should warn you, this is not that kind of story. There may be shocking moments if I'm brave enough to tell them. Otherwise, you're going to have to string together the meaning of a dozen stars to make this constellation like I did. The truth is, most of us can't remember most of it. That's the truth. It's going to take a while. But hang around if you want, and I'll tell the story my way. For most of us, it wasn't a relationship our dad wanted, really. So, if you're thinking about it from a perspective of redemption, he wasn't looking for it, not from us. Maybe to some extent from me. My sister Christy, she is number 5, had said something in a chat with me that she said I could share. And she said, Dad wanted to tuck us all away in a tower and pretend the real world didn't exist. Like Rapunzel, until he was forced to slowly relax his death grip and give up his dream of having 8 unsoiled brahmacharian nuns for daughters to fulfill his spiritual fantasies. That's what he called us, brahmacharians. Our group was the Atma Vidya Foundation. No men allowed. My oldest sister was 34 when she left the house. The youngest, me, I was 12. And at that point, there were 10 adults. My father and mother, my oldest, like I mentioned, 34, and the rest about 1 year different, down to me. And this is an environment where he decides he needs an office. 4 of his daughters don't have beds. Figure it out. Go share. Sleep on a couch. Now it's a den. It's a hard to describe dynamic because it changed a lot and it existed mostly in a vacuum. And when things happen in a vacuum with no point of comparison, it's very difficult to understand where you've been, where you are, where you're going, and set your sights on a goal and understand the steps to get there. You know, I never had the luxury of staying in my comfort zone. Comfort zone didn't exist for me then. And so I had to make it with, I was super OCD. And I don't say that as a term that's now trendy. I mean, I flicked the light switch on and off 10 times or 12 times or whatever number seemed like the thing at the time. I washed my hands compulsively until they were raw. I ran inside around the rooms and checked plugs because I was convinced that a fire was going to start by blankets touching one of the plugs. Speaking of a fire, my teapot's burning. Hold on a second. I wasn't going to school. I wasn't getting any kind of formal education. It was all religious. And what my sisters could kind of sit down and show me from their school, which all stopped abruptly when I turned 5 at kindergarten age. They all got just pulled out of school in order to have this immersion in this religious life. And he was really able to somehow completely shut off the world and outside influences. And we became this den of wild things. Always stepping on each other, always like wiggling for breath. And all in a sort of business, really, to churn out book buyers and followers in order to realize his ultimate goal, which was obtaining land to have what he called a retreat, and what I now realize would have been a compound of some sort, you know. He wanted to be someone important. He wanted to be someone who mattered. And he did matter to us. He had our complete devotion. He was super successful as an animal, right? Like, he reproduced 8 times, and a bunch of them had a bunch of kids, but he never valued that. In fact, he tried to prevent his kids from getting into relationships. I mean, we were strictly controlled, using the phone, having any contact with the outside. The only thing I've ever heard that actually was relatable to me was stories now from Scientologists who have escaped those compounds. And I think if he were successful in his mind, that's what it would have been on a mass scale. And when it hit me one day, I was like, thank the fucking Lord he didn't succeed at this mission. If you guys want to hear more about the OCD and ADHD journey and all that neurodivergent stuff, let me know in the comments, and I can definitely talk more about that journey. There's a lot of my sisters and I are neurodivergent from the way that we were raised, and probably some genetic component that influenced this creation of who my father became. And I certainly, I communicate better through, I think, by writing, but I definitely got it from my dad. I wasn't literate as a kid because of the lack of formal education, and neither was he. He left, I want to say, in I think through 7th grade, probably something like through 7th grade. He had some problems, I think, with learning disabilities and probably dyslexia and other stuff. So he was kind of a child left behind in terms of education. His brother went to college and started a flooring business. And my father worked almost every job I could think of. That's one thing that I used to love asking him about. He wasn't very good at making conversation with us, but he would say sometimes to me, did I ever tell you about the time when I worked as a television repairman? Or did I ever tell you about the time when I made shoes? You know, he had so many jobs, but I think he had a real hard time keeping the jobs for a lot of reasons. He had real interpersonal problems. So at some point, I want to say in maybe the 70s, I'll have to check with my mother on this. My father met a man who called himself Danji. This guy was a Eastern Indian guru who worked with my father and taught him some breath techniques and stuff. And my dad had some sort of a psychotic break or something like that, as best as I can understand. And he became convinced after that this man had accidentally opened up some sort of psychic portal inside of him and made him so sensitive that everywhere he went, everywhere he looked, he knew who people were and saw through them to their soul and could read their minds. So he shut himself away and raised these kids that he took out of school at all varying ages, and their lives just froze in this house. Around the time my mother was pregnant with me, fears and delusions had come full bloom. He had disconnected from his family, wouldn't answer their calls, would pick up his extended family, put us all in one old Pontiac station wagon. Me, I was a passenger too, in my mom's. She was pregnant with me 8 months, and for almost a year they were between homes. And at a certain point, for months at a time, they were just driving up and down the coast, from California to Oregon, up and down the coast, waiting to stop at some place where my father's psychic intuition would say was not dark. They actually gave up homes they could have lived in because he had a bad feeling about it, or thought something bad had happened there at some point, or so just internalized in all these constant fantasies that were really, I think, probably terrifying for him, and had my whole family following them like gospel. And so they would stop at rest stops, and my mom, 8 months pregnant, would put her feet up, and he would take the big long seat and lay out, and she would just put her feet up in the front, try to get some rest. It was I think probably a couple of weeks before I was born that they settled into the house that I was born in and lived for the first few years. So that took a tremendous toll on my sister's mental health, being homeless for that period and camping on and off and having no place to go. Sleeping on the hoods of the car and the top of the car like ants piled on top of each other, while he slept inside, and getting woken up by sprinklers spraying all over them. I mean, this was a super traumatic time. It was a coming of age period for a lot of my sisters, and it just kicked in these mental illnesses that are just prevalent in this household because no one could function that way. So fast forward years later, he still believes in a special psychic connection. He's been introduced to this holy man named Satya Sai Baba, who resides in India in a huge palace called the Prasanthanilayam. And best as I can tell, he did amazing things in terms of building hospitals and universities and things like that. And my dad believed that he had a psychic connection and spoke to him and felt things from him, and that he was God in person walking the earth. For some reason, he thought God needed to get faxes. I mean, he also sent letters, and he believed that since God just got, and God being the Satya Sai Baba, had all-knowing, all-universal powers, but you still had to send letters like a prayer, and he would get these letters and he would just feel whatever questions you put into them, so it didn't matter what you wrote. And so he invented this idea of rub letters, and he would have somebody, often me, pass out scraps of paper to everyone in the house and say, rub letter, time for a rub letter, and everybody would have to stop what they were doing and send a prayer through rubbing into this paper. And then somebody would cut out a tiny little piece, or tear out a tiny piece of each one of 10 persons' letters, and then glue it or paste it onto one letter, and then that would go out airmail to India. And then faxes came out before internet, and suddenly my dad could fax India in the middle of the night, and I would wake up in the middle of the night to those loud screeching fax tones, and I would know, something's up. He needs immediate contact with God. Now, don't get me wrong. He sent faxes, but he didn't get return faxes. For some reason, God needed to get them, but he didn't need to send them back. He could just send visions and feelings. So after sending the fax, my father would then sit and wait for the message in return, the feeling he would get, and then he would come to everybody and announce to us what the new direction or the new mission or the new little thing that we did wrong, or the lesson that we had to learn, or this big new thing that we all had to prevail over as a family. And he believed that we were pure and we had no karma that would keep us back on this wheel of life, and that the ultimate goal was to get off the wheel, that life itself was punishment, and that dying with no karma, because you're so self-aware and so in tune with God and living such a pure life, was the only way to get out of that punishment. And he believed that was the ultimate goal. He had to help the entire world learn to do that and educate them. And all wars and all problems were because there were no self-realized souls. You didn't have to technically die. You just had to be a saint. Now, these might sound by themselves like harmless, even good messages. But remember here, this is not in normal context. This is with 34-year-old woman, a 32-year-old woman, a 29-year-old woman, all these women who wanted to leave the house and go to work and date and engage with life and weren't allowed to do so, weren't allowed to get driver's licenses or to even go out and take a walk without being in groups and being monitored. And one person would be, so if two of them went and one person talked to someone else, the other one was supposed to report back on it and make sure that no outsiders were having undue influence. I mean, it was an extremely tightly controlled setting. And also think about faxes were like $30 to $50. And this is a very, very poor family who doesn't have a lot of money. It's almost like as bad as drinking it away, as he was faxing away the food money. After becoming acquainted with this holy man, he was working in a shoe factory. And maybe at some point I'll tell you the story in his words when he told me one day in writing. But he was working in a shoe factory and suddenly he was having an out-of-body experience. And he had this deep spiritual, peace. And my dad wasn't a guy who had a lot of peace in his life. And after that, he chased that feeling. And I think he believed that it was connected to some special mission that had been given to him by Baba. So he gathered the family around when I was still, I think, probably 2. I don't know. I'd have to ask my sister if I was even born. He gathered the family around and told them all that they had agreed before they were born to come into this life, into this family, and we'd agreed to this mission, and that the only way that we could attain this mission and attain self-realization and peace at the end of life and stop being reborn, which was the ultimate goal of his belief. And he called us brahmacharyans, although I think technically we would have been brahmacharyas. But we even had little ID cards where we were all dressed in white with long hair, and we looked to people like we were probably Mormon, I've been told. And we didn't really interact. N-E-C, he would say. N-E-C, no eye contact. When you go out, keep your eyes averted. Don't look straight at anyone. I'm pretty sure there were no real written rules about this, keep in mind. So I'm recreating. So all of our life was surrounding this idea that any action you take that creates karma will stop you from freeing your soul. So good things, bad things, anything you do could, and I would sit there and I would think, like be frozen in this OCD panic state thinking, well, what if I inadvertently drop something and it, crushes an ant? And then I would go to my father like panicky and freaking out, and he would say, well, do penance sort of by doing a good thing with another animal. So if you accidentally squished an ant, go feed a bird. And so I would I'd be out feeding the birds and people would probably think how cute, and I would be like, oh my God, I have to get rid of my bad karma for stepping on the ant. It was really, really a fucked daily state of living. It's in the little things and it's in the big things, like uprooting everybody and burning everything we ever owned and going to India. It's in the big things like, oh, they forgot to give me a name. I didn't get a name till I was 10 years old and I have a birth certificate to prove it. And he talked of how Baba would come to America and everyone would come to know him, and he really believed that he would become this revered individual. And one day, when I was 10 or so, he burned everything we ever had. I got a name at 10 years old for the first time. Before that, I was baby girl Maniscalco. Got me a passport, and we left the house thinking we'd never come back, and showed up in India. You can imagine that went kind of crazy. And with that, I'm gonna have to pick this up on the next episode because that's all I got. Thanks for listening with me. I appreciate it. I really do. I'll see you next time.